One of the speakers at the Cleanup conference in Adelaide at the moment has been speaking about water security from a slightly different perspective and things like how underground barriers can help keep our drinking water safe from contamination. Scott Warner is the Vice President and Principal Hydrogeologist with the international engineering company AMEC. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Dougal. How are you?
Good, thank you. Can we talk, first of all, about what underground barriers are, what they do?
Yeah, the idea is that we can take a certain granular material or even something like a compost or other treatment material and install it in a trench or a deep barrier underground, and as the water flows through it, the contaminated water, certain reactions will start up that will actually reduce those contaminants and destroy them, leaving clean water on the other side of the barrier.
So it's essentially a form of filtration.
It's kind of like a filter, exactly. You think of if you have a filter at your tap or your other water source, you're taking out the contaminants. The idea here is that we do it underground, and we do it in a way that we don't have to actually add energy. We don't have to remove the water, so we conserve the resource while treating the water at the same time.
And how widely used is this at the moment around the world?
Well, we've been working on this technology for about the last 20 years or so, and we've seen full-scale installations on essentially every continent, more than 200 installations worldwide. Some are as small as maybe 10 meters long, some are up to 500 or 600 meters long.
And are they something that has been looked at enough in Australia? I mean, are there working models here?
Yeah, in fact, there have been a couple of installations in Australia, actually in both the west and in the east, primarily in the urban centers where some of the industrial pollutants are needed to be treated. Now, some of them have been looked at kind of small-scale experiments, and the idea is that to take those experiments, understand what's worked and what hasn't worked, and then build the full-scale design following that.
So what sort of things, for example, in Australia have you been looking at? We've been talking recently about things, and you're at a cleanup conference. One of the things we've looked at is landfill and the ability of all sorts of bad things to leach out of all sorts of different wastes like e-wastes and get into the water system somehow. Is that one of the things you look at?
That's a very good question. In fact, absolutely, yes. In fact, landfills are great examples where if we can look at the geology and we understand it well, we can actually construct these barriers at the toe of these landfills or where we know that the contaminants might leach out, and we essentially have this protective barrier between the landfill and the drinking water supply wells or a river or a stream or a lake. So it's actually a very good use of this type of technology.
And is it hard to do? I mean, is it hard to find out where the leaching would occur and then get to that spot, dig a trench and get the material in there?
Yeah, and that's a great point, and that's the real one trick. And what we've been stressing here at the conference, and what I've always stressed in my practice, is that the characterization aspect is really the most critical thing. Fortunately, we've been developing in the industry a number of fantastic tools, from geophysics to drilling to other methods where we can try and identify where those contaminants are going. So it's kind of like a doctor taking an X-ray and understanding where the contaminants are, so we know where to put these systems and build them so that they have a much better chance of succeeding than, of course, failing. So
does technology and the use of technology, I guess it's improved over the 20 years you've been working on it?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a number of developments, and fortunately we have a number of universities, including those here, the University of South Australia and others, with the CRC care program, as well as those I've worked with a lot in North America and in Europe, have really developed a number of fantastic technologies. And it's nice to see that we can develop these by putting in the research development dollars to do that.
One of the things that is very much a concern in regional areas and certainly across our region is mining and the way that mining can affect underground aquifers and whatever kind of mining it might be. Is this something you think is able to be used in that sort of circumstance possibly?
Yeah, that's a great aspect of where this system can work, because what we really focus on is trying to change the metals content of the leachate or the water that might be coming out of those mining sites. And what we try and do is manipulate the geochemistry, change it from having a lot of oxygen to maybe removing the oxygen, which would help in changing some of the metals content. And that's been used. Actually, it's interesting because while we're talking about this technology is only maybe 20 years old, the mining industry has actually used something like this for many decades because they understand what some of those issues were. Now, not all mining sites have worked it well, but but many of them see that they can use certain types of materials like limestone. Limestone is a great way to reduce the metals content from leachate coming off the mine, and that's been used for many, many years.
So does the sort of product you use, the sort of composition of what you would use, change depending on what you're trying to provide a barrier against then?
Yeah, it does, and that's actually part of the challenge, but also part of the good, I'd call it the fun of our job in coming up with that creative method. And I personally believe that whatever chemical we have to deal with that's a contaminant, there is a certain material, a recipe, if you will, that is best for changing that chemistry and reducing the toxicity of that material. It doesn't mean we found all those yet, but I'd say that for 80 to 90% of those contaminants that we have to deal with on a regular basis, we can test that in the laboratory and do it with success. The key is now to make it work underground. And so do you see yourself or people like you working more with mining companies as mining, certainly in our part of the world, continues to grow? Absolutely. In fact, we are working with mining companies around the world right now. As we all know, the mining industry is at a high. The mineral resources are certainly at a high. And so, fortunately, many of the clients that we work with are taking the time and putting in the investment to put those remedies in ahead of time and not after the fact where we've seen in the past. And I suppose the other question is cost effectiveness. How expensive is it to do some of this remediation work? Right, and that's a great question. Of course, we're asked that all the time. There is capital cost that needs to go into it right away. I mean, it's a construction project, so the capital at the very start of the project is usually where the money is the greatest. But the beauty of this is that it's a sustainable technology. The idea is that the longer you can make this last, and that's what our goal is, to make these systems last 10, 15, 20, 25 years or longer, then you don't have to actually put in energy, you don't have to put in dollars. You do monitor it, but the cost goes down appreciably over the long term, and that's the best part of this technology. It really is a sustainable method to try and reduce the contaminants. And do you feel at the conference you're at, there's a good feeling about some of the ways to clean up? Oh, very much so. In fact, we had a full day session on Monday going through these technologies with examples from throughout the world, from essentially both hemispheres and all continents. And what we've talked about is what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how we can move this technology to the forward and actually even have more opportunity.